A bleeding ulcer nearly destroyed the Doobie Brothers' $500,000 empire in 1975. When lead singer Tom Johnston collapsed backstage in Memphis, they faced a business crisis that threatened everything they'd built. The band was selling millions of records, but without their frontman, their substantial touring income, worth $500,000 annually, was suddenly at risk. Instead of folding, they made a decision that shocked everyone, bringing in yacht rock vocalist Michael McDonald, completely changing their sound and somehow multiplying their income. What began as an emergency replacement became a reinvention that propelled them to greater heights. Their 1978 album, Minute by Minute, topped the Billboard charts for 5 weeks, sold over 3 million copies, and won a Grammy for Best Pop Vocal Performance by a duo or group. This bold pivot transformed a potential financial disaster into one of the most surprising success stories in music business history. In 1970, imagine walking into a dingy bar in San Jose, California, and hearing a scruffy group of musicians playing raw blues rock for a crowd of bikers. That band was the Doobie Brothers, and nobody, not even the band members themselves, could have predicted they'd be selling millions of records just a few years later. The band formed almost by accident. Drummer John Hartman arrived in California hoping to join Moby Grape. When that fell through, he met guitarist Tom Johnston, and they soon connected with Patrick Simmons, whose distinctive finger-picking style became essential to their sound. "We were basically playing for beer money," Johnston later recalled. Their performances at venues like the Chateau Liberté in the Santa Cruz Mountains earned barely enough to cover gas and basic expenses. Their sound back then was primarily gritty blues rock with extended instrumental sections, music that energized live audiences but had limited radio potential. The turning point came dramatically in 1971 when a Warner Brothers talent scout happened upon one of their shows. Despite their rough presentation, he recognized something special in their energetic performance. Warner Brothers Records was aggressively expanding their rock roster at the time, signing numerous California-based acts. Their self-titled 1971 debut album sold poorly, less than 50,000 copies, and didn't even chart, creating immediate pressure to deliver results or lose their contract. At this critical crossroads, the band faced a crucial business decision: remain true to their original sound or adapt to something more radio-friendly. They chose adaptation with their 1972 album, Toulouse Street. Working with producer Ted Templeman, they developed a more accessible sound while maintaining enough edge to satisfy early fans. This commercial gamble paid off spectacularly. Toulouse Street achieved gold status and reached number 21 on the Billboard charts. Listen to the Music reached number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100, giving them their first genuine hit single and establishing the band as a commercially viable act. Their timing coincided perfectly with the growing album-oriented rock AOR radio format. The band's versatile sound allowed them to reach listeners across multiple formats. Rock stations played their upbeat numbers, while softer tracks found homes on pop and easy listening stations. This cross-format appeal made them especially valuable to Warner Brothers Records, who recognized the financial potential of a band that could simultaneously chart on different radio stations, doubling or tripling their potential audience reach. While Warner Brothers saw dollar signs in the band's versatility, even they couldn't predict how a single reluctant recording decision in 1973 would catapult the Doobie Brothers from merely successful to multimillionaires. Their third album, The Captain and Me, contained 2 songs that would transform their sound and financial trajectory in ways that seemed impossible just months earlier. The pivotal moment came during studio sessions when producer Ted Templeman insisted on properly recording a jam the band had been playing live. The Doobies considered Long Train Runnin' nothing more than a casual improvisation they called Mississippi Dutch Down. Johnston hadn't even written proper lyrics yet. When Templeman pushed to formalize and release it as a single, it created significant tension in the studio. Templeman's insistence proved transformative. Long Train Runnin' soared to number 8 on the US Hot 100 and earned gold certification in the UK. Their follow-up single, China Grove, reached number 15, giving the band back-to-back radio hits that cemented their commercial viability across multiple markets. These singles drove The Captain and Me to sales figures that quadrupled their previous efforts. The album sold over 2 million copies and reached number 27 on the Billboard charts. A remarkable achievement for a band that had been struggling in bars just 3 years earlier. The financial impact extended beyond album sales. As radio hits increased their popularity, their touring income skyrocketed. The Doobie Brothers quickly graduated from smaller venues to commanding substantial guarantees in larger concert halls. For a band that had once played for beer money, this dramatic shift in earning potential was transformative. This upward trajectory continued with their 1974 follow-up album, What Were Once Vices Are Now Habits, though not without an initial scare. The album initially performed below expectations, threatening to halt their momentum. Then something unexpected happened. Black Water, a track buried on side 2 with its distinctive a cappella breakdown section, began gaining traction on radio stations months after the album's release. Written and sung by Patrick Simmons rather than Tom Johnston, Black Water reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in March 1975, becoming their first chart-topping hit. This unexpected success pushed the album past 2 million copies sold and established a pattern that would serve them well. Songs finding their audience through organic radio growth, rather than massive initial promotion. It also demonstrated that the band wasn't dependent on a single sound or songwriter, a versatility that would prove crucial in the coming months. By 1975, the financial transformation was complete. In just 4 years, they had gone from obscurity to commercial powerhouse with 4 platinum albums and substantial touring revenue. Their collective annual income had grown from barely enough to sustain individual members after expenses to several $1 million by 1975. Each band member was now earning substantial sums from album sales, touring revenue, and merchandise. A dramatic reversal for musicians who had once played in biker bars for beer money. That financial peak in 1975 suddenly meant nothing when Tom Johnston collapsed backstage in Memphis, leaving the Doobie Brothers facing a crisis that threatened everything they'd built. Johnston, the voice behind their biggest hits and primary songwriter, was rushed to the hospital with excruciating stomach pain just before a sold-out show. "I had an ulcer, a bleeding ulcer," Johnston would later explain about the condition that sidelined him at the height of their success. Doctors discovered the severity of his condition on the eve of their major tour to promote the new album, Stampede. The timing couldn't have been worse. The band was embarking on this tour with significant financial commitments at stake. In a tense Memphis hotel room later that night, the band and management weighed their limited options. The atmosphere was thick with anxiety. Their frontman was hospitalized, fans were already filling venues, and contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars hung in the balance. Record label executives pushed for cancellation, arguing that continuing without their frontman would damage the band's carefully cultivated image and potentially alienate their growing fan base. Cancellation would mean not only lost ticket revenue, but also significant penalties for breaking venue contracts, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in immediate losses, not to mention the long-term damage to their momentum. Guitarist Jeff "Skunk" Baxter offered an unexpected solution. Having recently worked with Steely Dan, Baxter proposed bringing in Michael McDonald, a keyboard player and background vocalist from that band, as a temporary fill-in while Johnston recovered. What made this suggestion particularly risky was that McDonald sounded nothing like Johnston. His voice was smoother, more soulful, and firmly rooted in R&B rather than Johnston's rock-oriented style. With no better options and financial pressure mounting, the band took the gamble. McDonald learned the material in just days and was thrust onto stages across America. John Hartman later recalled that McDonald was so anxious about living up to the band's standards that he initially didn't want to get out of his car during early rehearsals, unsure if he could fill Johnston's shoes. The audience response was immediately divided. Longtime fans who had connected with Johnston's energetic rock vocals were often confused or disappointed by McDonald's dramatically different sound. Some walked out of shows, while others stayed but complained loudly about the band's new direction. Yet something unexpected was happening simultaneously. As McDonald's distinctive baritone voice filled concert halls, new faces began appearing in the crowd. Listeners who had previously ignored the Doobie Brothers but were drawn to McDonald's more sophisticated, soulful approach. "I think, originally, I was supposed to just fill in for Tommy, but I guess we clicked, and not long after I was asked to be a full-time member. The rest, as they say, is history," McDonald would later reflect. What began as a temporary emergency solution evolved into something permanent when Johnston's health problems continued, eventually forcing him to step away from the band entirely in 1977. Industry experts predicted disaster. Conventional music business wisdom held that replacing a lead singer, especially with someone who sounded completely different, was commercial suicide. Record label executives expressed serious concerns about the stylistic shift, worrying that radio programmers would abandon the band entirely. The Doobie Brothers ignored this advice entirely. Instead of trying to find someone who could imitate Johnston's distinctive voice, they leaned into McDonald's unique talents. His sophisticated keyboard work and soulful vocals pushed the band in an entirely new musical direction, one that emphasized smooth R&B-influenced arrangements over the guitar-driven rock that had defined their earlier hits. This transformation wasn't just artistic, but financial. By embracing McDonald's distinctive talents rather than trying to replicate Johnston's sound, the Doobie Brothers effectively expanded their potential audience rather than replacing it. This strategic pivot, born from a medical emergency that should have derailed their career, instead positioned them for their most commercially successful era yet. This strategic gamble paid off beyond anyone's expectations when Taken It to the Streets sold over 1 million copies in 1976, reaching number 8 on the Billboard charts. But behind the platinum plaques and sold-out venues, a bitter power struggle was brewing that threatened to tear the band apart at the peak of their success. When Michael McDonald's first album with the Doobie Brothers hit platinum status, the business decision to keep him looked brilliant on paper. What fans couldn't see was how this commercial victory was creating deeper divisions within the group itself. Ted and Michael became one faction against Pat and the rest of us, bassist Tieran Porter revealed in a candid interview. The band that once performed as a unified front was now splitting into factions. On one side stood producer Ted Templeman and Michael McDonald, championing the new R&B influenced sound. On the other side, Patrick Simmons and several original members fought to preserve elements of their earlier identity, creating a divided creative process that made recording sessions increasingly tense. This artistic tug-of-war didn't stay in the studio. It followed them on tour, where the band was playing to larger crowds than ever before. Shows were generating substantial revenue, staggering figures that should have united them in celebration, but instead heightened the stakes of who controlled the band's direction. The audience itself was transforming before their eyes. McDonald's sophisticated keyboard work and soulful vocals had attracted an entirely new demographic of listeners. The crowds were getting older, more affluent, and included far more women than during their earlier biker bar days. Radio programmers who specialized in adult contemporary formats, previously closed to the band, were now eager for their new material. This demographic shift translated directly to higher ticket prices and premium venue bookings. Despite the internal conflicts, the Doobie Brothers reached even greater commercial heights with their 1978 album Minute by Minute. The record became their first to hit #1 on the Billboard charts, where it remained for 5 weeks and eventually sold over 3.1 million copies, their biggest commercial success to date. The album's lead single, What a Fool Believes, became a genuine cultural phenomenon, winning 4 Grammy Awards, including Record of the Year and Song of the Year. The album itself won the Grammy for Best Pop Vocal Performance by a duo or group, cementing their transition from rock band to mainstream pop success. The financial windfall didn't heal the growing rifts within the band. Drummer John Hartman, who had been there from the very beginning, finally reached his breaking point in 1979. He walked away from the millions they were making, followed soon after by guitarist Jeff Baxter. By 1980, some members felt they had become little more than McDonald's backup band, as one insider described it. Industry insiders watched with fascination as the Doobie Brothers defied all conventional wisdom about band dynamics. Just as they were becoming one of Warner Brothers' most valuable acts, they were losing original members at an alarming rate. Their 1980 album, One Step Closer, still achieved platinum status with over 1 million copies sold and reached #3 on the Billboard chart, but the creative tensions were becoming unsustainable. In financial terms, the McDonald-led Doobie Brothers had achieved a level of commercial dominance that their original lineup had never approached. Meanwhile, their 1976 compilation Best of the Doobies was quietly becoming their most lucrative release. The album would eventually sell 12 million copies and achieve rare diamond certification, an industry recognition reserved for the elite tier of recording artists who sell over 10 million units of a single album. By 1982, the money-making machine that employed 30 people was about to implode, not from declining sales, but internal fracture. Despite platinum albums and sold-out venues, Patrick Simmons, the last remaining founder, found the artistic compromise too great and announced his departure. The band faced an unprecedented dilemma: continue without a single original Doobie, or shut down entirely. It wasn't just the guys in the band. There were close to 30 people employed by this corporation. It was their whole livelihood, McDonald later reflected. Rather than continue with a completely new lineup, they made the difficult decision to disband. Their farewell tour generated substantial revenue, providing one final financial windfall before they ceased operations in September 1982. The years that followed proved challenging for the former members. Michael McDonald achieved modest solo success, but the others discovered an uncomfortable reality. Once you abandon a successful brand, recapturing that commercial magic becomes extraordinarily difficult. Then, in 1987, something unexpected happened. Drummer Keith Knudsen organized a benefit concert for Vietnam veterans, reaching out to his former bandmates for what was intended as a one-time event. Remarkably, 12 former members agreed to participate, setting aside past differences for a cause they believed in. The chemistry they rediscovered and the enthusiastic fan response sparked conversations about reformation. Initially, I envisioned a single show as a benefit, Knudsen recalled. The benefit's success led to an expanded charity tour, generating unexpected interest from longtime fans and a new generation of listeners. Record labels took notice. Joe Smith, then president of Capitol Records, offered to match any Warner Brothers deal to sign the reunited band. Their 1989 comeback album Cycles, featuring Tom Johnston's return on lead vocals, went gold and produced a top 10 single with The Doctor, proving their commercial viability hadn't disappeared after all. What began as a simple benefit concert had reignited one of rock's most successful franchises, opening the door to an entirely new chapter, one that would prove even more resilient than their first. Their comeback's success was just the beginning. While hundreds of classic rock acts eventually sold their music rights for quick payouts, the Doobie Brothers made one crucial business decision that would multiply their catalog's value exponentially. The true genius behind their longevity wasn't just creating hits, it was maintaining control over much of their catalog. Unlike many 1970s bands who surrendered publishing rights for immediate cash, the Doobies retained ownership, positioning them perfectly for the streaming era decades later. The value is evident in a single song. Black Water continues generating steady royalties from radio, downloads, streaming, and licensing. Public performance royalties account for more than half this income. In 2019, publishing rights for Black Water and other songs were valued at substantial sums for just a 10-year term, demonstrating their enduring financial value. This ownership strategy proved invaluable as the industry underwent seismic shifts. When physical album sales collapsed in the early 2000s, many classic rock acts watched their royalty checks shrink dramatically. The Doobies maintained freedom to license their music for commercials, films, and television, creating revenue streams that didn't exist when those songs were recorded. The streaming revolution further validated their strategy. Legacy acts with recognizable hits accumulated millions of streams across platforms, generating consistent monthly income that continues increasing as new listeners discover their music. Their 2020 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction marked another turning point. Though the pandemic forced a virtual ceremony, the honor significantly boosted their profile and catalog value, introducing their music to younger audiences. The pandemic presented their greatest business challenge yet. Their planned 50th anniversary tour, reuniting all key members, faced multiple postponements. The band lost essentially a full year of touring revenue, historically their most reliable income source. When touring resumed in 2021, they demonstrated remarkable resilience, playing to impressively large audiences spanning multiple generations, from large amphitheaters to more intimate 2,500-seat venues. Their balanced revenue model has been key to their longevity. Where many classic rock acts rely exclusively on touring, the Doobies built multiple income streams: catalog streaming, licensing, merchandise, and touring. This diversification protected them from industry volatility and provided financial stability through changing market conditions. Their 1976 compilation, Best of the Doobies, perfectly illustrates their enduring catalog value, having now sold 12 million copies and achieving rare diamond certification, placing them in an elite category with only a handful of artists who have reached this commercial pinnacle. What started as a Northern California bar band has evolved into one of rock's most durable business success stories. The Doobie Brothers have proven their remarkable adaptability by continuing to tour extensively into 2023, with their 50th anniversary tour drawing crowds across the country. Their sustainable business model has weathered lineup changes and industry shifts that have sunk countless other bands. With tens of millions of records sold worldwide and their Best of the Doobies compilation achieving rare diamond certification for 10 million copies sold, they've created a legacy that continues to generate substantial revenue decades after their formation. The band's catalog value remains strong in the streaming era, with a diversified revenue approach that many younger acts now try to emulate. Perhaps most impressively, they're not resting on past glories. The band is actively creating new music with plans for an album called Walk This Road, set for release in 2025, a remarkable commitment for a band that began during the Nixon administration. From humble beginnings playing for bikers and dive bars to Rock Hall of Fame status, the Doobie Brothers mastered both musical evolution and business longevity. The dramatic shift from Johnston to McDonald didn't end their career. It reinvigorated it, proving that sometimes the most unlikely business decisions yield the greatest returns. Their story demonstrates a fundamental business truth: adaptation is essential for survival. The medical crisis that should have ended their career instead forced a reinvention that propelled them to greater heights. By embracing change rather than resisting it, they created one of rock's most unlikely success stories. A band that continues to evolve and thrive more than 5 decades after their formation.